Ma'am, you need to step away from my desk. This lounge is for paying customers, not charity cases.
That's right.
The words cut through the polished
I'm
air
sorry,
of JFK Terminal
there's
4's
been a
Platinum
mistake
Sky
with your
Lounge
booking.
like a blade. Derek Sullivan didn't whisper them. He didn't try to be discreet. He said them loud enough
This
for
is
every passenger in the
unacceptable
marble-floored
behavior
waiting area to
immediately!
hear his voice carrying the authority of a man who believed he was protecting something sacred. The young black woman standing at his reception desk didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She just looked at him with tired eyes that had seen this moment before. Her name was Amelia Carter, and she was 28 years old. She wore a gray NYU hoodie, faded jeans, and white sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried nothing but a worn leather backpack and a dead phone. She looked like a college student who'd taken a wrong turn somewhere between the food court and her gate. What Derek Sullivan didn't know was that the tired young woman he was dismissing owned 78% of the terminal he worked in. What he couldn't see was that her charity case appearance masked the fact that she'd spent the last 18 hours in London finalizing a deal that would make her aviation holding company the largest private airport operator on the East Coast. And what he definitely couldn't have guessed was that in exactly 47 minutes, she would fire him, shut down his lounge, and transform the culture of an entire terminal. "I have a reservation," Amelia said quietly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders. Carter A. private jet departure at 4:30. Derek Sullivan was a man who wore his position like armor. At 45, he'd spent 12 years climbing from entry-level security to senior lounge manager, and he treated the Platinum Sky Lounge like his personal kingdom. His pressed Navy uniform was immaculate, his silver name tag polished to a mirror shine, and his graying hair was combed with military precision. To Derek, the lounge wasn't just a workplace. It was proof that he'd made it, that he belonged in spaces where powerful people gathered. He looked Amelia up and down with the practiced eye of a man who believed he could assess someone's worth at a glance. The hoodie, the backpack, the exhausted posture of someone who clearly couldn't afford first-class anything. "Private jet," he repeated, and his tone turned the words into an accusation. "Right. And I'm the Pope." Behind the reception desk, Sophia Martinez shifted uncomfortably. At 32, she'd worked as Derek's front desk associate for 3 years, and she'd seen this performance before. The way his voice changed when certain passengers approached. The way his customer service smile transformed into something cold and dismissive. She'd never said anything because she needed the job, because she had 2 kids at home, because speaking up seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. But something about this felt different. Bigger. More dangerous. Near the lounge entrance, James Morrison looked up from his laptop. He was 38, an investment banker from Manhattan, wearing a $3,000 suit and waiting for his flight to Dubai. He'd been coming to this lounge for 5 years, and he'd never seen Derek speak to anyone like this. Almost without thinking, he pulled out his phone. "Check your system," Amelia said, her voice dropping to a tone that made something cold crawl down Sophia's spine. "Carter A. You'll find everything you need there." Derek's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Lady, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't the Greyhound station. We have protocols here. Standards. And those standards exist for a reason." He gestured toward the gleaming lounge behind him, where passengers in designer clothes sat in leather chairs sipping champagne and working on devices that cost more than most people's monthly rent. These people paid for exclusivity. They paid for peace. And that means keeping out people who clearly don't belong. Elena Rodriguez watched from the concierge station, her heart hammering against her ribs. At 24, she was the youngest member of Derek's team, and she'd only been working at JFK for 8 months. But last month, she'd processed a stack of ownership documents that had made her pause. Carter Aviation Holdings, majority stakeholder in Terminal 4 operations. The signature at the bottom had been clean and confident A. Carter. She'd assumed it was some corporate executive she'd never meet. some distant figure in an expensive suit who collected checks from behind a Manhattan boardroom table. But now, looking at the tired woman in the gray hoodie, Elena felt a sick recognition crawling up her throat. "Sir," she said quietly, stepping forward. "Maybe we should just... back to your station." "Elena," Derek snapped without taking his eyes off Amelia. "Adults are talking." Dr. Sarah Kim looked up from her medical journal, her dark eyes sharp with the kind of attention that came from years of emergency room work. She was 42 Korean American, and she'd seen enough human cruelty to recognize it instantly. Whatever was happening at the reception desk, it had nothing to do with reservations or protocols. She'd been flying out of JFK for 6 years, and she'd never seen Derek treat a white passenger with anything less than professional courtesy. She'd never seen him demand extra verification from someone in an expensive suit, and she'd certainly never heard him talk about people not belonging. Rachel Thompson was already recording. The 29-year-old travel blogger had built her YouTube channel on authentic moments, unexpected encounters, and stories that revealed something true about the world. Her phone was positioned perfectly to capture both Derek's face and Amelia's response, and her finger hovered over the live stream button. Something told her this was about to become the kind of content that changed everything. "I'm not playing any game," Amelia said, and there was something in her voice that made the entire reception area fall silent. "I'm trying to access a lounge that my company contracts with. I'm asking you to do the job you're paid to do, and I'm giving you one opportunity to check your system before this becomes something much bigger than either of us wants to deal with." Derek's face flushed red. In 12 years of gatekeeping, no one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever stood there calm and quiet and made him feel like he was the one who didn't understand the situation. "People like you," he said, his voice rising, "always try this scam. Designer knockoff bag. Fake confidence hoping we won't notice that you don't belong here." "Well, I notice. I've been protecting this lounge for 12 years, and I know trash when I see it." The words hit the polished air like a physical blow. Sophia gasped. James Morrison's finger moved to the record button. Rachel started her live stream. Elena took a step back as if she'd been slapped, and Amelia Carter looked Derek Sullivan in the eye and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just been given exactly what they needed. "People like me," she said quietly, "built this terminal. You just work in it." Derek Sullivan hadn't always been cruel. Once he'd been a 20-year-old kid from Queens whose father worked construction and whose mother cleaned office buildings at night. He'd grown up in a small apartment where the walls were thin and the dreams were smaller, and he'd fought for every promotion, every recognition, every small symbol that proved he'd made it out. The Platinum Sky Lounge was his proof. It was marble and leather and crystal glasses that caught the light just right. It was expensive shoes on expensive carpet and conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Derek had never owned a stock or seen the Hamptons, but he'd earned his place as guardian of this space, and he protected it with the desperation of someone who knew he could lose it all. But somewhere between climbing the ladder and reaching the top rung, Derek had forgotten the difference between earning respect and demanding it. He'd confused gatekeeping with power exclusion with excellence. And now, faced with a young woman who didn't fit his narrow definition of belonging, every insecurity he'd ever buried came roaring back to life. He looked at Amelia and saw every person who'd ever made him feel small, every country club that wouldn't have him, every boardroom where he'd never sit, every space where his paycheck would never be enough to buy true membership. So he did what insecure people do when faced with power they don't understand. He tried to destroy it. Amelia Carter had been 9 years old the first time someone told her she didn't belong. It was at a hotel in Atlanta where her grandmother had saved for months to take her on a special weekend trip. They'd walked through the gleaming lobby in their Sunday best, and the man at the desk had looked at them like they were stains on his perfect marble floor. "I'm sorry," he'd said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. "We're completely booked." But 9-year-old Amelia had seen empty rooms through the glass doors. She'd heard the reservations agent on the phone booking rooms for other guests. And she'd understood even at 9 that the problem wasn't availability. The problem was her. At 19, she'd tried to check into a boutique hotel near her college campus after a red-eye flight from a family emergency. She'd been exhausted, grief-stricken, wearing sweatpants and carrying a backpack. The manager had looked her up and down and suggested she might be more comfortable at the motel down the street. "People like you," he'd said, and those 3 words had followed her for a decade. At 22, she'd been invited to a networking event at an exclusive country club. She'd saved for weeks to buy the right dress, had practiced her elevator pitch in the mirror, had walked in with her head high and her business cards ready. But the valet had directed her to the staff entrance. The hostess had asked if she was there to cater the event. 3 different members had mistaken her for the help. She'd left that night with something burning in her chest. Not shame, not embarrassment, rage. But it was a cold, calculating rage. The kind that builds companies instead of throwing punches. The kind that buys buildings instead of burning them down. By 25, she'd started her first aviation consulting firm, with a loan she'd fought 6 banks to get. She'd specialized in airport operations, efficiency consulting, and infrastructure development. She'd worked 18-hour days and 7-day weeks, and she'd saved every dollar that didn't go to rent or ramen noodles. By 27, she'd merged with 3 other firms and formed Carter Aviation Holdings. She'd begun acquiring contracts, purchasing stakes in airport operations, and building a network of influence that stretched from coast to coast. And at 28, she owned or controlled significant portions of 9 major airport terminals, including the one where Derek Sullivan thought he had power. But ownership wasn't what drove her. What drove her was the memory of every time someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. What drove her was the promise she'd made to that 9-year-old girl in the Atlanta hotel lobby: no one would ever make her feel invisible again. More importantly, no one would ever make anyone else feel that way in spaces she controlled. Elena Rodriguez had grown up in the Bronx, the daughter of a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. She'd earned her associate degree in hospitality management through night school working days at a diner and weekends at a dry cleaner. The job at JFK was supposed to be her break, her chance to use her education and build something stable. She'd started 8 months ago full of hope and determination. She was going to work her way up, maybe become a manager herself someday. She was going to make her mother proud. But 8 months of watching Derek had worn down her optimism like water on stone. She'd seen him dismiss families who didn't speak perfect English. She'd watched him demand extra documentation from passengers whose skin was too dark or whose clothes weren't expensive enough. She'd heard him make comments about those people when he thought no one was listening, and she'd said nothing. Because she needed the job, because she was still on probation, because speaking up seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. But last month she'd processed those ownership documents, Carter Aviation Holdings, the signature that had been so clean and confident. And now watching Derek humiliate a woman who might be her actual boss, Elena felt something cracking inside her chest. Sophia Martinez understood Derek's type. She'd been dealing with men like him for 15 years, ever since she'd started working customer service jobs to support her kids after her divorce. Men who confused authority with worth. Men who treated service workers like furniture. Men who thought kindness was a sign of weakness. She'd learned to smile through it, to nod and apologize for things that weren't her fault, to absorb their anger and frustration and redirect it somewhere safe. It was survival, and she was good at it. But this felt different. This felt like watching someone cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And for the first time in 3 years of working under Derek, Sophia found herself wondering what would happen if she stopped smiling. What would happen if she stopped pretending that his behavior was acceptable? What would happen if she finally spoke up? James Morrison had been recording workplace discrimination before he'd even realized what he was doing. As an investment banker, he'd learned to spot patterns to recognize when something was fundamentally wrong with a situation. And everything about Derek's behavior toward Amelia was wrong. He'd seen Derek with other passengers. He'd watched the man fawn over wealthy clients, seen him bend over backward to accommodate anyone in expensive clothes. Hell. Derek had personally walked James to his seat more times than he could count. Had remembered his coffee preference had made him feel like a valued customer. But this woman who was asking for nothing more than basic service was being treated like a criminal. James had started recording for his own protection in case the situation escalated, and he needed evidence of what had really happened. But as Derek's words grew uglier and Amelia's composure remained unshakable, he realized he was documenting something much bigger. He was recording the moment when casual bias became public humiliation, when institutional prejudice stepped out of the shadows and revealed itself in fluorescent light. And something told him this video was going to matter. Rachel Thompson had built her YouTube channel on authentic travel experiences on showing her viewers the reality behind the glossy brochures and marketing campaigns. She'd reviewed lounges and hotels and airlines, always looking for the human story behind the corporate facade. But this wasn't a review. This wasn't content planning or audience engagement strategy. This was a woman being humiliated for the crime of existing while black in a space that had decided she didn't belong. And every instinct Rachel had as a content creator, as a journalist, and as a human being was screaming at her to capture every second. Her phone was steady in her hands, the live stream counter climbing as viewers joined to see what was happening. The comments were already starting to roll in outrage and disbelief and demands to know where this was taking place. And Rachel knew, with the certainty of someone who'd seen content go viral before, that this moment was about to explode beyond the boundaries of JFK Terminal 4. This was about to become the kind of story that forced change. "I don't know what game you're playing," Derek said, his voice getting louder with each word, "but this isn't the Greyhound station. We have standards here. Real standards." He gestured again toward the lounge where passengers were beginning to look up from their devices and conversations. These people paid for exclusivity. They paid for peace, and that means keeping out people who clearly don't belong. Amelia's expression didn't change. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a black leather wallet, worn but expensive. "Check your system," she repeated. Carter A. Reservation confirmed this morning. "Anyone can claim anything," Derek snapped. "Security protocols exist for a reason. And those protocols tell me that someone dressed like they just rolled out of a homeless shelter doesn't belong in a first-class lounge." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Around the reception area, conversations stopped. Passengers looked up from their phones. Even the ambient noise of the terminal seemed to fade as Derek's voice carried across the polished space. Sophia Martinez felt her stomach twist. In 3 years of working for Derek, she'd never heard him be this openly hostile, this publicly cruel. There was something about Amelia's calm presence that was driving him to escalate beyond anything she'd seen before. "Mr. Sullivan," she said quietly, stepping closer to the desk. "Maybe I could just check the back to your station," Sophia Derek snapped without taking his eyes off Amelia. "I'll handle this." But Sophia didn't move back. Something in her had crystallized some line that Derek had finally crossed. "Sir, it would just take a second to verify." "I said back to your station." Derek's voice cracked like a whip loud enough to make several passengers flinch. "One more word, and you can find another job." The threat hit Sophia like a physical blow, but it also did something else. It made her angry, bone-deep, righteously angry in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Because suddenly she was thinking about her kids at home, about the bills that needed paying, about all the times she'd swallowed Derek's casual cruelty because she needed this job to survive. And she was thinking about this woman being humiliated for no reason, except Derek's need to feel powerful. "Check the system," she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly across the reception area. "Just check it." Derek's face went purple. "You're fired." "No," said a voice from behind them. "She's not." Everyone turned. Elena Rodriguez stepped away from her concierge station, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "Sophia's right. We should check the system." "Elena, don't," Sophia whispered, but Elena shook her head. "Mr. Sullivan, last month I processed ownership documents for Carter Aviation Holdings, majority stakeholder in Terminal 4 operations. The signature was A. Carter." Derek stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "That's impossible." "It's not impossible," Elena said, her voice getting stronger. "It's in the files. Carter Aviation Holdings owns 78% of this terminal's operating contract." "That doesn't mean anything." Derek's voice was rising toward hysteria. "Anyone can have the same name. This is obviously some kind of elaborate con game," but doubt was creeping into his voice and everyone could hear it. James Morrison stopped pretending to work on his laptop. He was recording openly now, his phone aimed directly at Derek. "You know," he said conversationally, "in my line of work, we have a saying. When you're in a hole, stop digging." Derek spun toward him. "This is none of your business." "Actually," James said, still recording, "public discrimination in a federally regulated space makes it everyone's business. And I'm thinking my 2 million LinkedIn followers might find this pretty interesting." Rachel Thompson's live stream counter was climbing. 500 viewers. 1,000. 500. The comments were coming in faster than she could read them, but she caught fragments. "This is disgusting. Someone call the police? Where is this happening?" She was recording from a different angle, capturing both Derek's increasingly frantic behavior and Amelia's unshakable calm. "This is Rachel Thompson coming to you live from JFK Airport," she said quietly into her phone, "where we're witnessing what appears to be clear discrimination against a black passenger by airport staff." Dr. Sarah Kim had seen enough. She stood up from her chair, her medical bag in her hand, and walked over to the reception desk with the purposeful stride of someone used to taking control of emergency situations. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years making life and death decisions. "What exactly is the problem here?" Derek turned to her with visible relief. Finally, someone who looked like they belonged. Someone in expensive clothes with an expensive bag and an expensive education written in every line of her posture. "Dr. Kim, thank God. This woman is trying to scam her way into the lounge. She's claiming to have a reservation under a fake name, and she's disrupting our other guests." Dr. Kim looked at Amelia, then back at Derek. "Have you checked her reservation?" "I don't need to check anything." "Look at her." "I'm looking at her." "Doctor," Kim said calmly, "I see a tired traveler asking for service. She's apparently paid for. What am I supposed to be seeing?" Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She doesn't look like... People like her don't... People like her don't." What Dr. Kim's voice was surgical in its precision. "Don't travel. Don't deserve basic customer service. Don't have the right to exist in the same spaces as you." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, doctor?" Kim stepped closer, and suddenly Derek was surrounded. Sophia and Elena flanking him at the desk, Dr. Kim in front of him. James recording from the side, Rachel live streaming from the entrance. All of them looking at him like he was something that had crawled out from under a rock. "I meant," Derek said desperately, "that we have protocols, standards. I'm just doing my job." "Your job," said a new voice, cold and precise as winter morning is customer service, not customer judgment. This time everyone turned to look at Amelia. She hadn't moved from her spot in front of the reception desk, but something in her presence had shifted. The exhausted traveler was gone, replaced by something sharper. something that made the air itself feel different. "You've had multiple opportunities to simply verify my reservation," she continued, her voice carrying clearly across the increasingly crowded reception area. "Instead, you've chosen to humiliate me in front of witnesses. You've threatened your own staff for trying to do their jobs, and you've made it clear that your decision has nothing to do with protocols or standards." She took a step forward, and Derek actually took a step back. "Your decision," she said quietly, "is based entirely on your assumption that someone who looks like me doesn't deserve to be treated with basic human dignity." Derek's face was sweating now, his carefully pressed uniform starting to wilt under the lights and attention. You can't. This isn't." "Check your system," Amelia said one final time. "Carter A, or call your supervisor. Your choice." Derek's hand hovered over his computer keyboard. Around him, phones were recording live streams, were broadcasting, and witnesses were watching. He could feel his world narrowing to this single moment, this single decision. He could check the system and potentially discover he'd made the worst mistake of his professional life. Or he could double down and call security. Pride and panic warred in his chest. And pride, as it so often does, won. Derek reached for his phone. "Security," he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. "This is Derek Sullivan at Platinum Sky Lounge. I need officers to remove a trespasser who's harassing our guests and disrupting lounge operations, immediately." He hung up and looked at Amelia with triumph burning in his eyes. "You had your chance," he said. Amelia nodded slowly as if accepting the terms of a negotiation. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did. And so did you." Miguel Santos had been working maintenance at JFK for 8 years, and he'd learned to move through the terminal like a ghost. Invisible to the passengers, ignored by the staff present, but not worth noticing. It was the kind of invisibility that came with wearing a uniform that marked you as working class in a space designed for the wealthy. But Miguel wasn't invisible because he was stupid or unaware. He was invisible because people like Derek Sullivan had decided he didn't matter enough to see, which meant Miguel saw everything. He'd seen Derek accidentally lose the reservations of Hispanic families. He'd watched him demand extra documentation from passengers whose English wasn't perfect. He'd heard Derek make comments about those people and welfare queens and food stamp travelers when he thought no one was listening. Miguel had said nothing because speaking up was a luxury he couldn't afford. Because his crew chief was Derek's golf buddy. Because complaining about discrimination would put a target on his back that could follow him to every airport job in the city. But now, pushing his cart past the Platinum Sky Lounge, Miguel stopped and watched Derek humiliate a young woman for the crime of being black in his precious space. And something inside him that had been compressed for 8 years suddenly expanded. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Not for YouTube or social media or viral content. For the union. For the discrimination complaint he was finally ready to file. For the paper trail that would make sure Derek's behavior couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Miguel had been documenting Derek's pattern of bias for months, waiting for the moment when it would cross the line from casual prejudice into actionable discrimination. And this moment, with witnesses and cameras and live streams, was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Dr. Sarah Kim had grown up in a family that understood the cost of speaking up. Her parents had immigrated from South Korea in the 1970s, and they'd built their success on the strategy of keeping their heads down, working harder than everyone else, and never giving anyone a reason to notice them. It had worked. Her father had built a successful accounting practice. Her mother had become a respected teacher, and Sarah had followed their path to medical school, to residency, to a successful cardiology practice in Manhattan. But success hadn't insulated her from the moments when people looked at her and saw other. The patients who asked for a real American doctor. The colleagues who complimented her English as if it was surprising that she spoke it fluently. The casual questions about where she was really from that reminded her she'd never be considered truly American by some people. She'd learned to navigate those moments with grace and professionalism, to smile and redirect and never let them see how their words landed. It was survival, and she was good at it. But watching Derek humiliate Amelia brought back every moment when Sarah had been the target of someone else's prejudice. Every time someone had decided she didn't belong, didn't deserve respect, didn't matter enough to treat with basic human dignity. And for once, Sarah was in a position to do something about it. She had credentials. Derek couldn't dismiss social status he had to respect and professional authority that gave her the luxury of speaking truth to power. She wasn't going to waste it. Rachel Thompson had started her YouTube channel 3 years ago as a way to document her travels and share hidden gems with other budget-conscious adventurers. She'd built a modest following of people who appreciated honest reviews and authentic experiences over glossy promotional content. But in the last year, her channel had evolved beyond simple travel tips. She'd started documenting moments like this one. Moments when the veneer of customer service cracked and revealed the bias underneath. Moments when ordinary people found themselves facing discrimination in spaces where they should have been safe. Her video of a hotel clerk in Miami refusing to honor a Hispanic family's reservation had gone viral last summer. Her live stream of an airline agent making racist comments about Muslim passengers had triggered an internal investigation that led to policy changes. Rachel had learned that her platform came with responsibility, that sometimes documenting injustice was more important than documenting vacation destinations, and that her audience was hungry for content that mattered, that made a difference, that forced accountability in places where accountability was rare. This moment felt bigger than anything she'd captured before, more clear-cut, more damaging, more likely to spark the kind of change that happened when discrimination was dragged into the light and forced to face consequences. Her live stream counter was climbing toward 3,000 viewers, and the comments were a mix of outraged support for Amelia and demands to know what airport this was taking place in. Rachel knew that by the time this was over, thousands of people would have watched Derek Sullivan reveal exactly who he was, and thousands of people would remember. Officer Michael Torres had been working airport security for 15 years, and he'd developed a sixth sense for situations that were about to explode. When his radio crackled with Derek Sullivan's request for backup, every instinct Torres had started screaming warnings. He'd responded to calls from Derek before. Usually they involved passengers who were suspicious or disruptive or not following protocols. And usually when Torres arrived, he found confused travelers who'd committed no crime other than existing while brown or black or poor in Derek's pristine space. Torres had learned to handle these calls with careful professionalism, to de-escalate rather than enforce, to document everything and ask probing questions and make it clear that he wasn't Derek's personal security force. Because Torres understood something that Derek didn't. Public discrimination in a federal facility wasn't just bad customer service. It was a civil rights violation that could trigger investigations, lawsuits, and federal oversight that would rain down on everyone involved. Walking toward the Platinum Sky Lounge with his partner, Officer Danny Brooks Torres, hoped this would be another false alarm. Another case of Derek's paranoia creating problems where none existed. But as they got closer and he saw the crowd gathering the phones recording and the tension crackling through the air like electricity, Torres knew this was going to be different. This was going to be the kind of incident that ended careers and changed policies and made national news. Officer Danny Brooks was 26 years old and eager to prove himself in a job he'd only held for 8 months. He'd grown up admiring law enforcement, believing in the nobility of protecting people and maintaining order in chaotic situations. But 8 months at JFK had taught him that most security calls weren't about actual threats. They were about paperwork and de-escalation and navigating the complicated politics between different departments and personalities. Derek Sullivan was a personality that Brooks had learned to handle carefully. The man had influence with supervisors' connections throughout the terminal and a tendency to file complaints against officers who didn't support his decisions enthusiastically enough. So when the call came in about a trespasser at the Platinum Sky Lounge, Brooks assumed it would be another routine removal. Someone without proper documentation maybe, or a passenger who'd had too much to drink. He didn't expect to walk into a situation where phones were recording witnesses were gathering, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the kind of tension that preceded explosions. He especially didn't expect to see Derek Sullivan, usually so composed and professional, sweating and flustered and clearly in over his head. This wasn't routine. This wasn't simple. And Brooks had the sinking feeling that whatever happened next was going to be the kind of incident that followed everyone involved for the rest of their careers. Elena Rodriguez felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at a drop that would either kill her or teach her to fly. Speaking up to Derek, contradicting him in front of witnesses, mentioning the ownership documents she probably shouldn't have seen. Every word had been a step away from safety and toward a truth that terrified her. But watching Sophia get threatened for trying to do the right thing had broken something inside Elena. Some carefully constructed wall between who she was at work and who she was in her heart. She thought about her mother who'd raised her to believe that dignity wasn't something you earned or purchased. It was something you carried inside yourself and recognized in other people regardless of what they wore or where they came from or how much money they had. Elena had been betraying that lesson every day for 8 months, staying silent, while Derek treated passengers like garbage, letting fear of unemployment override her basic sense of right and wrong. But not anymore. Not today. Whatever happened next, Elena was going to stand up for what was right, even if it cost her everything. Because some things she was finally realizing were worth losing a job over, and human dignity was definitely one of them. Officer Michael Torres arrived at the Platinum Sky Lounge reception area to find something he'd never seen in 15 years of airport security: a crowd. Not the usual scattered group of delayed passengers or curious onlookers, but a focused gathering of people all staring in the same direction with the kind of intensity that made his hand instinctively check his radio. Derek Sullivan stood behind his reception desk like a man under siege, his usually perfect uniform wrinkled and damp with sweat. His face was flushed red and his hands shook slightly as he pointed toward the young black woman standing calmly in front of him. "Officers, thank God," Derek said, his voice cracking with relief. "This woman has been harassing our guests and disrupting lounge operations for over 30 minutes. She's trespassing, attempting fraud, and refusing to leave when asked." Torres looked at the woman Derek was indicating. She was young, maybe late 20s, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. She held herself with the kind of quiet composure that Torres had learned to recognize in people who were either completely innocent or extremely dangerous. Nothing about her screamed disruptive trespasser. His partner, Officer Danny Brooks, was already reaching for his handcuffs, eager to resolve the situation quickly and efficiently. But Torres held up a hand, stopping him. "What's your name, Miss Torres?" asked his voice professional but not hostile. "Amelia Carter," she replied without hesitation. "I have a confirmed reservation for this lounge. My flight departs at 4:30. "She's lying." Derek jumped in before Torres could respond. "She gave me a fake name. Claims to be flying private, but look at her. Does she look like someone who can afford a private jet?" Torres had been a cop long enough to know that appearances could be deceiving, but he'd also been working at JFK long enough to know Derek Sullivan's patterns. The man had a history of security concerns that seemed to disproportionately involve passengers of color. "Have you checked her reservation in your system?" Torres asked. Derek's face went even redder. "I don't need to check anything. This is obviously a scam. She's disrupting our premium guests, and I want her removed immediately." Torres looked around at the disrupted passengers. Most were recording the interaction on their phones. Others were openly staring at Derek with expressions of disgust. None of them looked particularly concerned about being disrupted by Amelia's presence. Sir Torres said carefully, "Protocol requires that we verify someone's reservation status before considering removal for trespassing. I'm the manager here." Derek's voice was rising toward hysteria. "I determine who belongs in my lounge. And she doesn't belong." Rachel Thompson's live stream had exploded. The viewer count was climbing past 5,000, and the comments were a river of outrage support and demands for action. She kept her phone steady, making sure to capture both Derek's increasingly erratic behavior and the officer's responses. "This is insane," she whispered to her viewers. "Airport police have arrived, but the manager is refusing to even check this woman's reservation. This is discrimination happening in real time." James Morrison had put his laptop away entirely, focusing all his attention on recording what was clearly going to become a major news story. His LinkedIn post about the incident was already gaining traction, with colleagues sharing it and adding their own outrage about discrimination in air travel. 12 minutes, he murmured to Dr. Kim, who had positioned herself strategically between Derek and Amelia. 12 minutes of this man refusing to do basic verification while demanding police remove a paying customer. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. "In my hospital, if someone refused to examine a patient based on their appearance, they'd be fired and reported to the medical board. This isn't different." Sophia Martinez was shaking. The adrenaline of standing up to Derek, of being fired, and then watching the situation spiral completely out of control had left her feeling like she was vibrating at a frequency that might shatter her bones. But she couldn't look away. "Elena," she whispered to the younger woman standing beside her. "What you said about the ownership documents. You're sure?" Elena's face was pale but determined. "I'm sure. Carter Aviation Holdings. A. Carter. It's all in the files I processed last month." Then this man. Sophia looked at Derek, who was now demanding that Torres immediately arrest Amelia for trespassing, just made the biggest mistake of his life. Miguel Santos had moved his cleaning cart closer, positioning himself where he could record everything while appearing to work. His phone captured Derek's increasingly desperate demands, Torres's careful questions, and Amelia's unshakable calm. He'd already sent a text to his union representative. "Get down to Terminal 4 Platinum Sky Lounge now. Derek Sullivan discrimination incident. Multiple witnesses. Being recorded." The response came back immediately. "On my way." "Don't stop recording." Officer Brooks was getting impatient. "Torres, let's just process her and move on. We've got other calls waiting." But Torres was studying the situation with the kind of careful attention that had kept him out of trouble for 15 years. Something was wrong here. Not with Amelia, who answered every question clearly and showed no signs of deception or aggression, but with Derek, who was acting like a man whose world was collapsing around him. "Miss Carter Torres said, 'Do you have any identification?'" Amelia reached into her backpack and pulled out a passport. Torres examined it carefully. Valid, current, no signs of tampering. The photo matched, and the name was exactly what she'd given him. "And you said you have a reservation, Carter A. Confirmed this morning through my assistant. I can provide my confirmation number if someone would check the system." Torres turned to Derek. "Check the system." "I don't need to check anything." Sir Torres's voice carried a warning now. "I'm asking you to check the system. This is a simple verification that will resolve the situation immediately." Derek's hands were shaking as he turned to his computer. He'd gone too far to back down, now committed too much of his authority and reputation to the belief that Amelia was a fraud. If he checked the system and found a valid reservation, everything he'd said and done for the past 30 minutes would be revealed as baseless discrimination. But if he didn't check, he was directly disobeying a police officer's request in front of multiple witnesses. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Check it," Dr. Kim said quietly. "Just check it." "This is ridiculous," Derek muttered, but his fingers started typing. "Carter A. search." The computer screen filled with information, and Derek's face went white. Reservation confirmed. Private jet departure 4:30 p.m. Ground services through Platinum Sky Lounge. Payment processed. Account verified. But it was the account details that made Derek's world tilt on its axis. Carter Aviation Holdings. Corporate account. Priority status. Owner access authorization. Well, Torres asked. Derek stared at the screen like it was written in a language he didn't understand. This can't be right. What does it say? Torres moved around the desk to see the screen himself. What he saw made his blood go cold. Not just a valid reservation, but a corporate account with authorization codes he'd never seen before. Account status markers that indicated this wasn't just any passenger, but someone with significant influence in airport operations. Miss Carter Torres said carefully, "What is your relationship to Carter Aviation Holdings?" Amelia looked at him with eyes that held the patience of someone who'd been waiting for this question for 35 minutes. "I'm the founder and CEO." The words dropped into the reception area like stones into still water, creating ripples of silence that spread outward until the only sound was the ambient noise of the terminal beyond. Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound. Sophia gasped. Elena closed her eyes as if in prayer. James Morrison's phone captured every moment. And what Torres continued, his voice very quiet, is Carter Aviation Holdings' relationship to this terminal. "We hold the majority stake in Terminal 4 operations," Amelia said simply. 78% acquired through consortium purchase last year. Torres felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. He'd seen discrimination cases before, but this was something else entirely. This was a lounge manager refusing service to the woman who owned the building he worked in. This was Derek Sullivan committing career suicide in front of multiple cameras and live streams. Mr. Sullivan, Torres said, and his voice carried the kind of finality that made everyone in the reception area hold their breath. "You need to step away from the desk, but This is impossible." Derek's voice cracked completely. "She can't be." "Look at her." "I'm looking at her," Torres said grimly. "And I'm looking at a computer screen that shows she's exactly who she says she is. And I'm looking at about 15 witnesses who just watched you refuse service to a customer based on nothing but your personal assumptions about her appearance." Rachel's live stream had exploded to over 8,000 viewers. The comments were moving too fast to read, but she caught fragments. "Fire him, sue the airport. This is disgraceful." She turned the camera toward her face. "You guys, this just went from bad to completely insane. This woman apparently owns the terminal, and this manager just spent 35 minutes humiliating her for being black." Officer Brooks was staring at Derek like he'd never seen him before. "Jesus, Sullivan, what did you do?" But Derek wasn't listening. He was staring at Amelia with a mixture of horror and disbelief, as if she'd materialized from thin air specifically to destroy his life. "You should have told me," he whispered. "You should have said who you were." Amelia's voice was steady as stone. "I shouldn't have needed to. I should have been able to walk into this lounge wearing anything I wanted and receive the same service you give to every other paying customer." She stepped closer to the desk, and Derek actually flinched. "But you decided that what I looked like mattered more than who I am. You decided that my hoodie and jeans disqualified me from basic human dignity. And you made that decision loudly, publicly, and with absolute certainty that you were right." Torres was already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Torres at Terminal 4. I need a supervisor at the Platinum Sky Lounge immediately. We have a situation that requires immediate management attention." Derek seemed to realize that his career was circling the drain. "Miss Carter, please." This was all a misunderstanding. "I was just following security protocols. I can fix this. I can make this right." Amelia looked at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly across the crowded reception area. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, "the only thing you can do now is live with the consequences of your choices. The hashtag JFK disgrace started trending within minutes of Rachel's livestream hitting its peak viewership. What began as a few thousand viewers watching real-time discrimination had exploded into a social media phenomenon that was spreading across platforms faster than airport security could track. Rachel's phone was burning hot in her hands, the processing power struggling to keep up with the flood of viewers' comments and shares. She'd gained 3,000 new subscribers in the past 20 minutes, and her notification alerts had become a constant buzz of incoming activity. 8,000 viewers now, she whispered to her camera, keeping her voice low while maintaining focus on the unfolding drama. This is the biggest live stream I've ever done, and honestly I wish it was for any other reason. The comments section had become a river of rage support and demands for action. Someone call the news. This is 2024, not 1964. I'm never flying through JFK again. That manager needs to be fired. Where is airport administration, recording this for evidence? James Morrison had stopped pretending this was anything other than a career-defining moment. His LinkedIn post had been shared over 500 times with colleagues from across the financial industry weighing in with their own stories of discrimination in business travel. But it was his Twitter thread that was really gaining traction. 7 tweets documenting the timeline of events, complete with photos of Derek's increasingly erratic behavior and Amelia's unshakable composure. Thread: What I witnessed today at JFK Airport will make you sick. Airport lounge manager spends 30-plus minutes refusing service to black woman claims she doesn't belong. Calls security rather than check reservation. Plot twist: she owns the terminal. 1-7. The thread was being retweeted by verified accounts journalists, civil rights organizations, and celebrities. Each retweet brought more eyes to the situation, more pressure building like steam in a kettle. Dr. Sarah Kim had shifted into crisis management mode, using her medical training to document everything with clinical precision. Her phone notes were a detailed timeline of Derek's statements, Amelia's responses, and the reactions of witnesses. 2:15 p.m. Initial refusal of service based on appearance. 2:17 p.m. Manager uses phrase, people like you. 2:23 p.m. Refuses to check reservation system. 2:31 p.m. Threatens staff for attempting to help. 2:38 p.m. Calls security rather than verify customer status. 2:45 p.m. Police arrive. Manager still refuses verification. She'd also started a Twitter thread from her verified account as Dr. Sarah Kim, MD, with 50,000 followers who trusted her professional judgment. As a physician, I'm trained to treat every patient with dignity, regardless of appearance. Watching JFK airport staff refuse the same basic respect to a paying customer is heartbreaking and unacceptable. This is discrimination, period. Miguel Santos had positioned himself perfectly to capture Derek's meltdown from multiple angles. His union representative, Maria Gutierrez, had arrived and was recording from a different position, ensuring they had comprehensive documentation of the incident. Miguel Maria whispered, "How long has this been going on?" 40 minutes, he replied quietly. "And it keeps getting worse. He threatened Sophia for trying to help, denied the woman had a valid reservation without checking, and called her trash in front of everyone." Maria's face hardened. She'd been dealing with discrimination complaints at JFK for 8 years, but most were subtle, hard to prove based on he said, she said testimony. This was different. This was documented, witnessed, and broadcast live to thousands of people. Keep recording everything she told Miguel. This is the kind of case that changes policies. Elena Rodriguez had found courage she didn't know she possessed. Her initial fear of losing her job had transformed into something stronger. Determination to document the truth no matter what it cost her personally. She'd started her own video recording, focusing on Derek's computer screen when he finally checked the reservation system. The moment his face went white, the way his hands shook when he saw the corporate account details, the sound he made when he realized what he'd done. "Everyone needs to see this," she whispered to Sophia. Everyone needs to know what kind of person he really is. Sophia was documenting too, but her focus was different. She was recording Derek's treatment of staff, the way he'd threatened her job, the way he'd dismissed Elena, the way his authority had become cruelty when challenged. 3 years, she muttered, her phone capturing Derek's increasingly desperate attempts to justify his behavior. 3 years, I've watched him treat people like garbage, and I said nothing. Never again. Dr. Kim had taken on an unofficial coordination role using her medical authority to keep witnesses calm and organized. She'd helped Rachel position her live stream for optimal coverage, assisted James with his documentation, and made sure everyone was staying safe as the crowd around the reception desk continued to grow. Document everything, she told a businessman who'd started recording on his tablet. Time stamps, direct quotes, facial expressions. This man's career is over, but we need to make sure the evidence is undeniable. The businessman nodded grimly. I've been flying through this terminal for 6 years. I've seen him treat other passengers badly, but never like this. Never this openly. Meanwhile, Rachel's live stream had caught the attention of news organizations. Her phone was buzzing with direct messages from journalists asking for permission to use her footage from documentary filmmakers, wanting to interview her from civil rights organizations, requesting copies of her recording. But the most significant message came from a verified account she recognized immediately: CNN breaking news. We'd like to speak with you about licensing your footage for immediate broadcast. This story is developing nationally. Please call our newsroom immediately. Rachel's hands shook as she read the message. What had started as a travel blog live stream had become national news in real time. James Morrison was fielding his own media requests. As a financial industry insider with a significant LinkedIn following, his professional perspective on the incident was being sought by business journalists who understood the implications of discriminating against a major airport stakeholder. This isn't just about customer service, he was telling a reporter from the Wall Street Journal over text. This is about a lounge manager committing career suicide by discriminating against someone who literally signs his paycheck. The story was developing layers that extended far beyond a simple discrimination incident. Financial reporters were digging into Carter Aviation Holdings, discovering the scope of Amelia's business empire, understanding that Derek hadn't just insulted a passenger, he'd humiliated one of the most powerful people in aviation infrastructure. Miguel's union representative had started her own documentation process, but with a different focus. She was recording not just the discrimination against Amelia, but the hostile work environment Derek had created for his own staff. Sophia, Elena, she said quietly, I need you both to know that what he did to you today, threatening your jobs for trying to do the right thing, that's retaliation, and it's illegal. We're going to file complaints about the whole pattern. The ripple effects were spreading beyond the immediate incident. Derek's behavior wasn't just destroying his own career, it was exposing an entire culture of discrimination that had been allowed to fester in the Platinum Sky Lounge for years. Dr. Kim had started reaching out to her professional network. Understanding that this incident was going to require expert testimony about implicit bias, discrimination patterns, and the psychological impact of public humiliation. This is textbook discriminatory behavior, she was telling a colleague who worked in civil rights law. Documented, witnessed, broadcast live. It's going to be a landmark case. The social media explosion was becoming its own news story. JFK disgrace was trending nationally, with celebrities, politicians, and activists sharing the footage and demanding accountability. But underneath the viral nature of the content was something more significant, a moment of clarity about how discrimination actually worked in practice. This wasn't subtle bias or unconscious prejudice. This was open, documented, unapologetic discrimination by someone in a position of authority, captured in real time and broadcast to the world. And everyone watching understood that this moment was going to change things. Not just for Derek Sullivan, whose career was clearly over, but for every airport lounge, every customer service interaction, every moment when someone in authority decided who belonged and who didn't. The cameras were rolling. The witnesses were watching, and the world was paying attention. Derek Sullivan's worst day was about to become everyone's learning experience. Amelia's phone buzzed in her pocket with an incoming call from a contact labeled Victoria Nash, emergency only. She glanced at the screen, then at the chaos surrounding Derek's reception desk, and made a decision that would transform this from a customer service incident into a corporate crisis. "Excuse me," she said to Officer Torres, who was trying to process the fact that he'd just witnessed a terminal employee discriminate against the terminal's actual owner. "I need to take this call." She stepped slightly away from the crowd, but not far enough to escape the range of the recording phones. If anything, her calm professionalism in the middle of Derek's meltdown made the contrast even more stark. "Victoria," she said into the phone, her voice carrying clearly across the reception area. "I need you at JFK Terminal 4 immediately. Platinum Sky Lounge. Full discrimination documentation and immediate legal response." Derek, who had been desperately trying to explain to Torres why he shouldn't be held responsible for not recognizing the owner of the terminal, stopped mid-sentence when he heard the word legal. Victoria Nash's voice was sharp and clear, audible to anyone standing within 10 feet of Amelia. "What's the situation?" Lounge manager refused service for 45 minutes based entirely on racial assumptions. Multiple witnesses. Live video documentation. Police called. Full pattern of discriminatory behavior exposed in front of cameras. Jesus Christ. Victoria's voice carried the tone of a lawyer who understood exactly how expensive this was about to become. "Who's the manager?" Amelia looked directly at Derek. "Derek Sullivan, senior lounge manager, 12-year employee." Derek's face went from white to gray. The word legal had cut through his desperate rationalization like a knife through paper. This wasn't just about losing his job anymore. This was about lawsuits and depositions and national news coverage. Amelia Victoria continued, her voice now loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. "I'm putting you on speaker. Robert Anderson is here with me." The reception area fell completely silent. Robert Anderson was the operations director for Terminal 4. Derek's ultimate boss, and the man who'd hired Derek 12 years ago, believing he was getting a dedicated customer service professional. Ms. Carter Roberts' voice came through the phone with the weight of someone whose career was about to explode. "I am so sorry. I'm in the car now. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Derek made a sound like a wounded animal. Robert Anderson was coming. The operations director was coming to personally handle Derek's discrimination incident. In 12 years of employment, Derek had never had Robert Anderson personally respond to anything he'd done. Robert, Amelia said calmly, "I want you to understand that this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained pattern of discriminatory behavior that lasted nearly an hour. Mr. Sullivan refused multiple opportunities to verify my reservation, threatened his own staff for trying to assist me, and made explicitly racial comments about my appearance and worthiness." All documented, Victoria's lawyer voice was sharp as surgical steel. Multiple phone recordings live stream with over 10,000 viewers, social media posts going viral, and police witnesses. Elena stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice clear. "Mr. Anderson, sir, this is Elena Rodriguez from Concierge. I need to tell you something important." Derek spun toward her. "Elena, don't you dare!" "Sir." Elena continued, speaking directly into Amelia's phone. "This isn't the first time. We've seen Mr. Sullivan treat passengers differently based on their appearance for months. Miguel Santos from maintenance has been documenting incidents. Sofia Martinez was threatened with termination today for trying to help Ms. Carter." Robert's voice through the phone was deadly quiet. "Miguel Santos. Is he there?" Miguel stepped forward, his union representative beside him. "Yes, sir. I've been recording workplace discrimination incidents for 8 months. I have video documentation of Mr. Sullivan's pattern of behavior. Send everything to my office immediately. Maria, are you there?" Maria Gutierrez. The union rep spoke clearly into the phone. "Mr. Anderson, we're prepared to file formal complaints with the EEOC, the Port Authority, and Federal Aviation Administration. This incident is the culmination of a hostile work environment that's been developing for years. Derek was hyperventilating. The weight of 8 months of documented incidents, multiple federal agencies, and a viral discrimination case was crushing down on him like an avalanche. Victoria Amelia said, "What's our immediate legal position?" Victoria's response was clinical and precise. Federal civil rights violation in a federally regulated facility. Hostile work environment for staff. Corporate liability for failure to address documented patterns. Public accommodation discrimination with extensive documentation. We're looking at potential damages in the millions. Dr. Kim had been listening to the legal conversation with growing amazement. As a physician, she understood malpractice and liability, but this was something else entirely. This was watching a corporation realize in real time that they were facing catastrophic legal exposure because one manager couldn't treat a black woman with basic dignity. James Morrison was documenting the legal implications in real time, his financial background helping him understand the scope of what was unfolding. This isn't just employment law, he was telling his LinkedIn followers via live updates. This is corporate liability, federal discrimination, and potential securities implications if this affects Carter Aviation's stock price. Rachel's live stream had peaked at 12,000 concurrent viewers, and the legal conversation was being broadcast live to all of them. The comments section was exploding with people who understood they were watching a discrimination case develop in real time. Lawyer up Derek. This man is about to lose everything. Corporate liability lawyers are probably watching this too. JFK is about to write a massive check officer. Torres was documenting everything for his police report, understanding that this was going to become evidence in federal court proceedings. His radio was buzzing with calls from supervisors who'd heard about the incident and wanted immediate briefings. Torres' "What's your status?" came through his radio clearly enough for everyone to hear. Dispatcher. I've got a documented civil rights violation with multiple witnesses, video evidence, and corporate legal counsel en route. This is going to require supervisor response and probable federal notification. Brooks, his partner, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The simple trespassing call he'd expected to handle with handcuffs and paperwork had become a federal case with lawyers and union representatives and viral video evidence. Victoria's voice cut through the chaos again. Amelia, I need you to understand that this is about to become very public very quickly. CNN has already reached out about the video footage. We need to control the narrative. The narrative, Amelia said, looking directly at Derek, is simple. A black woman was denied service in a space she owns because a racist manager decided she didn't look like she belonged there. Everything else is just details. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate whisper. Ms. Carter, please. This was all a mistake. I can fix this. I can make it right. Amelia's response was quiet, but carried clearly to every phone recording the conversation. Mr. Sullivan, the time to fix this was when I first asked you to check my reservation 45 minutes ago. The time to make it right was when your staff tried to help and you threatened their jobs. The time to show basic human decency was any moment in the last hour when you chose cruelty instead. She paused, looking around at the cameras, the witnesses, the officers, the growing crowd of passengers who'd stopped to watch a man destroy his career in real time. What happens now, she continued, isn't about fixing mistakes. It's about facing consequences. Victoria's voice came through the phone with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Robert, we'll see you in 10 minutes. Derek Sullivan. I strongly advise you to contact legal representation immediately. This conversation is being recorded and will be used in federal proceedings. The line went quiet, and suddenly everyone in the reception area was looking at Derek Sullivan, a man who'd started his day believing he controlled who belonged in his space and was ending it as the center of a national discrimination case that would follow him for the rest of his life. Officer Torres broke the silence. Mr. Sullivan, you need to step away from the desk and remain available for questioning. This is now an active investigation. Derek looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to run, no one to blame, no way to undo the 45 minutes of documented discrimination that had just destroyed everything he'd built in 12 years at JFK. He was about to learn that some mistakes don't get fixed. They get prosecuted. Robert Anderson's arrival at the Platinum Sky Lounge was preceded by a wave of nervous energy that rippled through the terminal staff like an earthquake warning. Word had spread through the back channels and radio communications that the operations director was personally responding to a Code Orange situation, the internal designation for incidents with potential federal implications. He appeared through the crowd like a man walking toward his own execution, his usually perfect suit wrinkled from the rush, his face carrying the expression of someone who understood that his day had just become the worst of his professional career. Derek Sullivan watched his boss approach with the hollow-eyed stare of a condemned man. In 12 years of employment, Robert had visited the Platinum Sky Lounge exactly 3 times, all for routine inspections or VIP visits. He had never, ever personally responded to a customer service complaint. "Ms. Carter," Robert said, his voice carefully controlled but audibly strained. "I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about what you've experienced today." Amelia looked at him with the calm assessment of someone who'd spent years evaluating whether people were genuinely contrite or simply scared of consequences. "Mr. Anderson, I assume you've been briefed on the situation." "I've heard the basic outline," Robert replied, glancing nervously at the phones, still recording the crowd, still watching the live stream, still broadcasting to thousands of viewers. "But I'd like to hear directly from you what happened here." Derek stepped forward desperately. "Bob, this was all a misunderstanding. I was just following security protocols, Derek." Robert's voice cut through Derek's excuse like a blade. "Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question." The command was delivered with enough authority to make Derek step back physically, and Rachel's live stream captured the moment when 12 years of Derek's relationship with his boss died in a single sentence. Amelia's recounting was precise, chronological, and devastating. She spoke calmly about Derek's initial refusal to check her reservation, his escalating hostility, his explicit comments about her appearance and worthiness, his threats against staff members who tried to help. "He told me that people like me couldn't afford first-class anything." She said, her voice carrying clearly to every recording device. "He called me trash. He said I was disrupting the peace of customers who had earned the right to be here." With each sentence, Robert's face got paler. Derek's behavior wasn't just unprofessional customer service. It was documented discrimination that exposed the terminal to massive federal liability. "And when your staff members tried to verify my reservation," Amelia continued, "he threatened to fire them rather than spend 30 seconds checking his computer system." Sophia stepped forward, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "Mr. Anderson, he told me I was fired for suggesting we check the reservation system. He said if Elena spoke again, she could find another job." Elena nodded, her hands steadying as she found her courage. "Sir, I tried to tell him about the Carter Aviation documents I processed last month, but he refused to listen." Robert closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, Derek could see his own professional death reflected there. Derek Roberts said quietly, "Is this accurate?" Derek's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. I was following protocols. She didn't look like... the security procedures say." "Show me the protocol," Robert said, his voice sharp as winter air that tells you to judge a customer's worthiness based on their clothing. Derek couldn't answer because no such protocol existed. Airport security procedures focused on identifying genuine threats, not enforcing dress codes based on racial assumptions. Miguel Santos stepped forward with his union representative. "Mr. Anderson, We have 8 months of documentation showing this pattern. Video evidence of Mr. Sullivan treating Hispanic families differently, demanding extra verification from passengers of color, making derogatory comments about customers when he thought no one was listening. Maria Gutierrez handed Robert a folder. This is preliminary documentation for the formal complaints we're filing with federal agencies. Mr. Sullivan's behavior today was the culmination of a pattern, not an isolated incident. Robert opened the folder and scanned the contents. Witness statements, video timestamps, direct quotes, a comprehensive documentation of discriminatory behavior that painted a picture of Derek not as someone who'd made a mistake, but as someone who'd been abusing his authority for months. Dr. Kim had positioned herself where she could observe both Derek's reactions and Robert's growing horror as he realized the scope of the legal exposure. "Mr. Anderson," she said professionally as a witness to today's events, "I want you to understand that what happened here wasn't about miscommunication or policy confusion. It was about a man in authority deciding that a black woman didn't deserve basic human dignity." James Morrison addressed Robert directly. "Sir, I've been flying through this terminal for 6 years. I've watched Derek treat passengers differently based on their race for years, but today was different. Today he did it in front of cameras with live streams with thousands of people watching. This isn't going to stay contained to this lounge." As if to emphasize his point, James's phone buzzed with notifications. "CNN wants to interview me. So does MSNBC. The Wall Street Journal wants a comment about corporate liability implications." Robert's phone was buzzing too. His assistant media relations legal counsel, the Port Authority federal transportation officials. Everyone was calling because word was spreading through official channels that JFK Terminal 4 was facing a major civil rights incident with viral video documentation. Rachel addressed her live stream viewers directly. 14,000 people watching now. This has become national news while we're standing here. The hashtag JFK disgrace is trending nationwide. The weight of that statement hit Robert like a physical blow. This wasn't a customer service issue that could be handled with apologies and vouchers. This was a national news story that was going to follow JFK Terminal 4 for years. Officer Torres stepped forward with his incident report. "Mr. Anderson, based on witness statements and video evidence, this appears to be a clear civil rights violation in a federal facility. We're required to report this to federal authorities regardless of how you choose to handle it internally." Derek was shaking now, the full scope of his situation finally penetrating his shock. Federal investigation, national news coverage, union complaints, corporate legal action. His career wasn't just over. His entire life was about to be dissected by lawyers and journalists and federal investigators. "Please," he whispered to Robert. "This was all a mistake. I didn't know who she was." "That's the point," Amelia said, her voice cutting through Derek's desperation with surgical precision. "You shouldn't have needed to know who I was. You should have treated me with basic respect because I'm a human being, not because I sign your paychecks." She stepped closer to Derek, and he actually flinched. "But since you want to make this about who I am, let me be clear. I'm Amelia Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Carter Aviation Holdings. I own 78% of this terminal's operations. I employ over 3,000 people, including you." The reception area had gone completely silent except for the soft sounds of phones recording and the distant noise of terminal operations. "I built my company." Amelia continued on the principle that every passenger deserves dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like or how much money they have. "And in the 45 minutes I've stood in this lounge, you've shown me exactly why that principle matters." Robert was mentally calculating the legal exposure, the public relations disaster, the federal investigations, the potential damage to Terminal 4's reputation and operations. Derek hadn't just discriminated against a passenger. He'd humiliated his actual employer while cameras rolled and the world watched. "Derek Robert," said his voice carrying the finality of a tombstone inscription, "you're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. HR will contact you about returning your credentials and company property. Derek's knees buckled slightly. Bob, please. 12 years. I've worked here for 12 years. And in 1 hour, Robert replied coldly, "You've destroyed everything you built in those 12 years." Security officers who'd been called as backup moved forward to escort Derek out, but Amelia held up a hand. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, and her voice was quiet, but carried clearly to every recording device. "I want you to remember this moment. Not because I want you to suffer, but because I want you to understand. What you felt when you realized who I am. That shock, that fear, that humiliation. That's what you put me through for 45 minutes. Except I hadn't done anything wrong." Derek looked at her with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the scope of what he'd done. Not just to his career, not just to his reputation, but to another human being who'd committed no crime other than existing while black, in a space he'd decided she didn't deserve to occupy. "The difference between us," Amelia concluded, "is that my consequences come from your choices. Your consequences come from mine." And with that, Derek Sullivan was escorted out of the Platinum Sky Lounge he'd controlled for 12 years, past the passengers he'd humiliated through the terminal he'd worked in since 2012, toward a future that would be defined entirely by the worst hour of his professional life. The aftermath of Derek Sullivan's termination created a vacuum in the Platinum Sky Lounge that was immediately filled by a chaos of emotions, logistics, and the sudden realization that everything had changed forever. Sophia Martinez stood behind the reception desk she'd worked at for 3 years, but now it felt like foreign territory. The computer system Derek had refused to check still displayed Amelia's reservation details. Corporate account priority status owner access codes that made it clear this woman didn't just belong in the lounge, she owned it. "I can't believe I almost said nothing," Sophia whispered to Elena, her hands shaking as she processed the magnitude of what had just unfolded. 3 years of watching him treat people badly, and I almost let fear keep me quiet again. Elena was staring at her phone, where dozens of notifications were pouring in from friends and family who'd seen her face in the viral videos. "My cousin just texted me from Los Angeles. She saw me on Twitter standing up to Derek. People across the country are watching this." Robert Anderson was fielding phone calls from executives, lawyers, media relations, specialists, and federal officials who'd been monitoring the situation through social media alerts. Each conversation made it clearer that this incident was going to have consequences far beyond one terminated manager. "Yes, sir," he was saying into his phone while pacing near the lounge entrance. "Full cooperation with any federal investigation. Complete transparency. We want this handled properly." He hung up and turned to Amelia. "Ms. Carter, the Port Authority wants to schedule an immediate meeting. Federal aviation officials are requesting a formal briefing, and our legal department is asking if you intend to pursue civil action." Amelia looked around the lounge, at the passengers who'd witnessed everything, at the staff members who'd found the courage to speak truth at the phones still recording, and the live stream still broadcasting to a world that was paying attention. "Mr. Anderson," she said quietly, "what I intend to pursue is change. Real change. The kind that makes sure this never happens to anyone else." Dr. Kim had been observing the immediate aftermath with the clinical attention she brought to medical emergencies. The shock, the relief, the lingering tension, it all felt familiar from her work in trauma situations. "Ms. Carter," she said, stepping forward, "I want you to know that what I witnessed here today was institutional discrimination being documented in real time. As a physician, I understand the importance of accurate documentation for cases like this." She handed Amelia her business card. "If you need expert testimony about the psychological impact of public discrimination, I'm available. What Derek did to you wasn't just unprofessional. It was deliberately dehumanizing. James Morrison had transitioned from documenting the incident to analyzing its broader implications for his professional network. His LinkedIn post was being shared by executives across the aviation industry, and the responses were revealing an uncomfortable truth about discrimination in business travel. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," he was telling a colleague over the phone. "How many times has this happened when no one was recording? How many passengers have been humiliated in lounges and airports because someone decided they didn't look like they belonged?" His question was being echoed across social media as the story spread. JFK disgrace had evolved beyond just Derek's behavior to become a broader conversation about bias in customer service discrimination in travel and the courage required to speak up when witnessing injustice. Rachel Thompson's live stream had become the primary source for real-time updates about the incident's aftermath. Her viewer count had stabilized at around 15,000 people, many of whom had been watching for over an hour. "You guys, I've been doing travel content for 3 years and I've never seen anything like this," she was telling her audience. "This isn't just about one racist manager. This is about a system that allowed his behavior to continue for years until someone with enough power to fight back finally said enough." The comments on her live stream had evolved from outrage about Derek's behavior to discussions about how to create accountability in customer service industries, how to support employees who speak up about discrimination, and how to ensure that this incident led to meaningful change rather than just viral entertainment. Miguel Santos was coordinating with his union representative to ensure that all the documented evidence was properly preserved for the various investigations that were now inevitable. 8 months of careful documentation was about to become the foundation for a federal case that could change policies across the entire aviation industry. "This is bigger than Derek," he was telling Maria Gutierrez as they organized video files and witness statements. "This is about creating a paper trail that proves discrimination isn't isolated incidents. It's patterns that develop when nobody's paying attention." Maria nodded grimly. "And now everybody's paying attention. Federal investigators, civil rights organizations, media outlets. They're all going to want to see how deep this goes." Officer Torres was completing the most complex incident report of his 15-year career. What had started as a simple trespassing call had become a documented civil rights violation, with federal implications, multiple witnesses, and viral video evidence. "Brooks," he said to his partner, "this is going to be a textbook case in discrimination law. Every detail matters because this is going to court." Brooks was still processing the fact that he'd almost arrested the owner of the terminal for trespassing in her own building. "Jesus, Torres. What if we just cuffed her when Derek asked? What if we hadn't asked questions?" Torres's expression was grim. "Then we'd be facing federal civil rights charges alongside Derek. Never assume someone's guilt based on their appearance." Today's a reminder why. Elena Rodriguez had found her voice in ways she'd never imagined possible. The young woman who'd been afraid to speak up was now coordinating with lawyers, providing detailed testimony about Derek's pattern of behavior, and becoming a symbol for employees who refused to stay silent about workplace discrimination. "Ms. Carter," she said, approaching Amelia with a confidence that would have been impossible 3 hours earlier. "I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner. I knew Derek's behavior was wrong, but I was scared of losing my job." Amelia's response was gentle but firm. "Elena, fear is a tool that people like Derek use to maintain bad systems. Your courage today, Sophia's courage, that's what breaks those systems. Don't apologize for finding your voice. Use it." The conversation was overheard by passengers who were beginning to understand that they'd witnessed more than just customer service drama. They'd seen employees risk their livelihoods to do what was right, and they'd seen those employees supported rather than punished for their courage. Robert Anderson was beginning to comprehend the full scope of the cultural transformation that was about to be required. This wasn't just about firing Derek and issuing apologies. This was about rebuilding an entire operational culture to ensure that discrimination couldn't take root again. His phone buzzed with a text from the CEO of the Port Authority: "Full support for whatever changes are needed. This cannot happen again. Another message from the head of Aviation Security Federal Aviation is requesting comprehensive policy review. Full cooperation required. And then a message that made his blood run cold from the terminal's insurance company. Potential liability exposure requiring immediate legal consultation. Document everything. Derek's discrimination had created a cascade of consequences that would reshape policies, trigger federal oversight, and cost millions of dollars in legal fee settlements and operational changes. Dr. Kim was documenting the broader implications for her own professional network, understanding that this incident represented a moment of clarity about how bias operates in institutional settings. This is what institutional discrimination looks like when it's fully exposed. She was telling a colleague via text. One person with authority deciding who belongs, enabled by a system that doesn't require accountability until it's too late. The response was immediate. Can you testify as an expert witness? This needs to become case law. As the immediate chaos began to settle into the long process of investigations, policy changes, and legal proceedings, one thing was becoming clear to everyone involved. This hour at JFK Terminal 4 was going to be remembered as a turning point. Not just for Derek Sullivan, whose career and reputation were destroyed forever. Not just for Amelia Carter, whose response to discrimination was going to inspire policy changes across the industry. But for every employee who'd learned that speaking up was possible, every passenger who'd seen that accountability could be enforced, and every institution that understood they were being watched. The cameras were still rolling. The documentation was still growing, and the consequences were still cascading through systems that would never be the same again. Change had arrived at JFK Terminal 4, and it had arrived with the unstoppable force of truth being spoken to power in front of the entire world. The transformation of the Platinum Sky Lounge began within minutes of Derek Sullivan's termination. Robert Anderson stood behind the reception desk that had been Derek's kingdom, his hands shaking slightly as he faced the most challenging hour of his administrative career. Sophia, he said, his voice carrying the weight of immediate decision-making. Your interim manager of this lounge effective immediately. Elena, your assistant manager. Your first priority is ensuring every passenger here receives the service they deserve. Sophia stared at him in disbelief. 3 hours ago, Derek had fired her for suggesting they check a reservation. Now she was running the lounge she'd worked in for 3 years without ever being considered for advancement. Sir, she said carefully, I don't have management training. You have something more important, Robert replied, glancing at Amelia, who was coordinating with her legal team via phone. You have integrity, the training we can provide, the character you already showed today. Elena felt tears pricking her eyes. Mr. Anderson, when Derek threatened my job for speaking up, I thought my career at JFK was over. Elena, your career at JFK is just beginning. What you did today, choosing truth over security, that's leadership. We need more of it. Rachel Thompson's live stream captured the immediate promotions, and the comments exploded with support for the employees who'd found the courage to challenge discrimination. Yes, promote them. This is how change happens. Sophia and Elena are heroes. Finally, some justice. James Morrison had been observing the management transition with his financial industry perspective on crisis response. This is textbook crisis management. He was telling his LinkedIn followers via live updates, remove the problem, promote the people who spoke truth, signal immediate cultural change. Robert Anderson just saved his terminal from federal oversight. But the real justice was happening in smaller, more personal moments throughout the lounge. Miguel Santos approached Amelia with his union representative, carrying a tablet loaded with 8 months of documented discrimination incidents. Ms. Carter, Derek's behavior toward you wasn't isolated. We have video evidence of him treating Hispanic families, elderly, Asian passengers, and young black travelers the exact same way. Amelia reviewed the footage with the calm attention she brought to business negotiations, but her jaw tightened as she saw the pattern Derek had established, demanding extra verification from passengers of color, refusing service based on appearance, making derogatory comments about customers who didn't meet his narrow definition of appropriate. Miguel, she said this documentation is going to be crucial for federal investigators, but more importantly, it's going to help us understand how to prevent this from happening again. Maria Gutierrez, the union representative, handed Amelia a formal statement. Ms. Carter, we're not just filing complaints about Derek's behavior toward passengers. We're documenting the hostile work environment he created for his own staff. Sophia and Elena weren't the first employees he threatened for trying to do the right thing. Dr. Kim had transitioned from witness to expert consultant, using her medical background to help document the psychological impact of Derek's discrimination. She was interviewing passengers who'd witnessed the incident, understanding that their testimonies would be crucial for legal proceedings. What Derek did today wasn't just bad customer service. She was explaining to a business traveler who'd watched the entire incident. Public humiliation based on racial assumptions causes documented psychological trauma. This wasn't about policy confusion. It was about deliberate dehumanization. The business traveler nodded grimly. I fly through here monthly. I've seen Derek treat people differently, but I always assumed it wasn't my business. Today made me realize that silence makes us complicit. Officer Torres was coordinating with federal authorities who were already requesting comprehensive documentation of the incident. His incident report was becoming the foundation for what would likely be a landmark civil rights case. Ms. Carter, he said, approaching her with professional respect that contrasted sharply with Derek's earlier hostility. Federal aviation officials want to interview you about filing formal discrimination charges. This incident occurred in a federally regulated facility which triggers automatic federal jurisdiction. Amelia's response was measured but determined. Officer Torres, I want to pursue whatever legal action will prevent this from happening to other passengers. But I also want to make sure the focus remains on creating change, not just punishment. Rachel's live stream audience had grown to nearly 18,000 viewers, many of whom had been watching for over 2 hours as the story developed from discrimination incident to national news event to immediate policy response. This is incredible, you guys, she was telling her viewers. We're watching real-time accountability. The discriminatory manager is gone. The employees who spoke up are being promoted and federal investigators are already involved. This is how justice should work. But the most significant moment of immediate justice came when Amelia finally accessed the lounge she'd been denied entry to for nearly 2 hours. Sophia personally escorted her through the glass doors, and the contrast was stark. Where Derek had seen someone who didn't belong, every passenger in the lounge saw exactly what Amelia was: a professional traveler who deserved respect and service. Ms. Carter, Sophia said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water, a quiet space to work. Sophia, Amelia replied, settling into a leather chair near the window. What I'd like is for you to treat me exactly the way you'd treat any other passenger. No special service because you know who I am. Just basic dignity and respect. The statement was simple, but it carried clearly to the phones still recording, the passengers still watching, and the social media audience still following the story. Amelia wasn't asking for royal treatment because she owned the terminal. She was asking for the basic human dignity that should be standard for everyone. Elena approached with a tablet showing news coverage that was already spreading across national media outlets. Ms. Carter, CNN wants to interview you. So does MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR. This story is going national. Amelia reviewed the coverage with interest. The headlines were consistent. Airport owner discriminated against in own terminal viral video. Shows discrimination at JFK manager fired after refusing service to black woman who owns airport. Elena, she said, schedule interviews with outlets that want to discuss policy changes and accountability measures. I'm not interested in talking to anyone who just wants drama or revenge narratives. Dr. Kim overheard the conversation and approached with a professional perspective. Ms. Carter, as someone who studied institutional bias, I'd recommend focusing on the educational aspects of this incident. This is an opportunity to help people understand how discrimination actually operates in practice. James Morrison was coordinating with business journalists who understood the financial implications of the incident. The stock market is already responding, he was telling Amelia. Carter Aviation Holdings is up 3% because investors see this as evidence of strong leadership. Meanwhile, companies in the customer service sector are down because investors are worried about liability exposure. The immediate financial consequences were becoming clear. Derek's discrimination hadn't just harmed Amelia personally. It had created market volatility, triggered insurance investigations, and demonstrated to investors that discrimination was a business risk that required immediate attention. Miguel Santos was working with his union to ensure that Derek's termination was properly documented and that policies were put in place to prevent similar incidents. Ms. Carter. He said the union wants to partner with Carter Aviation to develop discrimination reporting protocols that protect employees who speak up. Miguel Amelia replied that's exactly the kind of structural change that makes this incident meaningful rather than just viral content. Rachel Thompson was preparing to end her live stream after nearly 3 hours of continuous coverage, but she wanted to capture the transformation that had taken place in the Platinum Sky Lounge. Look around this space. Everyone, she said, panning her camera across the lounge. 3 hours ago, this was a place where a black woman was told she didn't belong. Now it's a place where the employees who stood up for her are running operations where federal investigators are ensuring accountability and where real change is beginning. She focused her camera on Amelia, sitting calmly in the lounge chair working on her laptop like any other business traveler. This is what justice looks like, Rachel concluded. Not revenge, not punishment. Just the simple recognition that every person deserves dignity and respect regardless of what they look like or how much money someone assumes they have. The immediate justice phase was complete. Derek was gone, accountability was established, and change was beginning. But everyone involved understood that real justice would come from ensuring this never happened to anyone else. 3 weeks after what became known as the JFK Incident, Terminal 4 was unrecognizable. Not physically. The same marble floors gleamed under the same fluorescent lights. The same shops sold the same overpriced snacks. But culturally, everything had changed. Amelia Carter stood in the executive conference room overlooking the terminal, surrounded by policy manuals, training materials, and implementation timelines for what would become known as the Carter Dignity Protocols. The name had emerged from media coverage, but Amelia had embraced it because it captured exactly what the changes were designed to achieve. The three-pillar approach is comprehensive, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the organizational psychologist Amelia had hired to design the cultural transformation program. Prevention through training, accountability through monitoring, and restoration through immediate response. Robert Anderson sat across from them, flanked by representatives from the Port Authority, federal aviation officials, and civil rights organizations who were treating Terminal 4 as a pilot program for airport-wide discrimination prevention. The Federal Oversight Committee is impressed with the scope of changes, said Agent Lisa Brennan from the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Office. If these protocols prove effective, they'll become the national standard for airport customer service. The prevention pillar was already showing results. Every Terminal 4 employee, from janitors to executive management, had completed 40 hours of dignity and respect training. Not the typical corporate seminar with PowerPoint slides and multiple-choice tests, but immersive role-playing workshops where employees experienced discrimination firsthand. Sophia Martinez, now officially the Platinum Sky Lounge manager, had just completed her advanced training certification. Ms. Carter. She reported the staff response has been remarkable. People are actually excited about the new standards because they feel empowered to provide excellent service to everyone, not just passengers who meet some arbitrary appearance requirement. Elena Rodriguez had been promoted to Terminal Customer Dignity Officer, a new position that gave her authority to intervene immediately in any situation involving potential discrimination. Her first week had included 3 incidents where passengers were being treated differently based on appearance, and in each case, she'd been able to correct the situation before it escalated. "The reporting system is working," Elena told the group, referring to the anonymous bias incident reporting app that had been installed throughout the terminal. "Employees feel safe reporting problems because they know they'll be supported, not punished." Miguel Santos had become the union liaison for the dignity protocols, helping to ensure that frontline workers understood their rights and responsibilities under the new system. "The culture change is real," he reported. "People are treating their jobs differently when they understand that customer dignity is part of their professional mission." The accountability pillar was perhaps the most innovative aspect of the program. Every customer interaction in the terminal was now monitored by AI systems that could detect verbal patterns, tone changes, and behavioral indicators of potential bias. "The technology isn't about surveillance," explained Dr. Walsh. "It's about early intervention. When the system detects potential discrimination, it immediately alerts supervisors who can intervene before a situation escalates." Rachel Thompson had been hired as the terminal's transparency coordinator, using her social media expertise to ensure that the implementation process remained visible to the public who'd watched the original incident unfold. "Accountability only works if people know they're being held accountable," she explained to her YouTube audience in a follow-up video that had garnered over 200,000 views. Terminal 4 is live streaming their policy changes because they want everyone to see that real change is happening. The restoration pillar focused on making things right when problems did occur. A rapid response team could be activated immediately to address discrimination incidents, provide support to affected passengers, and implement corrective measures before situations could spiral into viral controversies. Dr. Sarah Kim had joined the team as a consulting expert on trauma response, helping to design protocols that recognize the psychological impact of discrimination. "When someone experiences public humiliation based on their identity," she explained to the training staff, "the response needs to address not just the immediate incident, but the longer-term emotional damage." The financial implications of the Carter Dignity protocols were already becoming clear. Terminal 4's customer satisfaction scores had increased by 47% in 3 weeks. Discrimination complaints had dropped to 0. Employee retention was up and recruitment had become easier as word spread about the terminal's commitment to dignity and respect. James Morrison had been tracking the business impact for his financial industry followers, and the results were striking. "This isn't just about doing the right thing," he reported in a LinkedIn article that was shared over 5,000 times. "It's about business effectiveness." Discrimination is bad for the bottom line because it drives away customers, creates legal liability, and destroys employee morale. The ripple effects extended far beyond Terminal 4. Other airports were implementing similar protocols. Customer service companies were revising their training programs, and business schools were developing case studies about the incident. "We're getting calls from airports across the country," reported Maria Gutierrez, who'd been promoted to Regional Union Coordinator for Dignity Protocols. "Everyone wants to know how to implement these changes before they have their own viral discrimination incident." Federal investigators had completed their review and were preparing to issue recommendations based on Terminal 4's transformation. Agent Brennan was optimistic about the broader implications. "What we've seen here proves that institutional change is possible when leadership commits to comprehensive reform rather than superficial fixes. The most significant change was cultural rather than procedural." Passengers were reporting that Terminal 4 felt different. More welcoming, more professional, more committed to treating everyone with respect regardless of appearance or perceived social status. "I fly through here monthly," reported one business traveler in a survey. 3 months ago, I watched staff treat passengers differently based on how they were dressed. Now, everyone gets the same courteous service. It's like working in a completely different building." Amelia herself had become a symbol of the transformation. but she was careful to keep the focus on institutional change rather than individual heroics. "This was never about me personally," she explained in an interview with CNN. "It was about creating systems that protect everyone's dignity, not just people who happen to own the building." The training materials developed for Terminal 4 were being distributed to airports nationwide, creating a standardized approach to discrimination prevention that could be implemented across the entire aviation industry. Dr. Walsh was particularly proud of the peer accountability component. Employees don't just report discrimination they witness. They're trained to intervene professionally when they see it happening. The whole culture has shifted from "not my job" to everyone's responsibility. Sophia Martinez had emerged as a national spokesperson for employee empowerment in customer service industries. 3 months ago, I was afraid to suggest checking a computer system, she told a conference of hospitality managers. Now I have the authority and training to ensure every passenger receives dignified treatment. The difference is that my employer supports doing the right thing instead of punishing it. Elena Rodriguez was developing similar programs for other airports, helping to scale the Terminal 4 model across the country. The key insight she explained to a group of airline executives is that preventing discrimination requires empowering frontline employees, not just training them. The federal oversight period was scheduled to last 2 years, but early indicators suggested that Terminal 4's transformation was permanent rather than performative. Customer complaints about discrimination had dropped to zero, employee satisfaction was at record highs, and the terminal was being used as a model for airports internationally. "We've created something that will outlast all of us," Amelia reflected during a quarterly review meeting. "The Carter Dignity Protocols aren't about my name or my company. They're about ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else." The transformation was complete, but the real test would be whether the changes could be sustained over years and decades through management transitions and staff turnover and budget pressures. Early indicators suggested that the answer was yes. The culture change had been so comprehensive, so thoroughly embedded in operational procedures and employee training, that discrimination had become practically impossible rather than simply prohibited. Terminal 4 had become proof that institutional change was possible when leadership committed to comprehensive transformation rather than cosmetic reforms. And the world was watching, learning, and implementing their own versions of change. Derek Sullivan's journey from Terminal 4 manager to unemployed pariah began with a phone call from his lawyer that came 3 days after his termination. The news was worse than he'd imagined possible. Derek attorney Michael Stevens said without preamble, "You need to understand the scope of what you're facing. Federal civil rights charges, potential criminal liability for violation of civil rights under color of authority, and personal lawsuits that could bankrupt you completely." Derek sat in his studio apartment in Queens, the same neighborhood he'd grown up in, surrounded by boxes of personal items he'd collected from his office. 12 years of awards, commendations, and positive performance reviews stared back at him from cardboard containers, evidence of a career that had been destroyed in a single hour. "How is it criminal?" Derek asked, his voice hollow. "I was doing my job." "No, Derek, you were abusing your position to deny service based on race, in a federal facility, with multiple witnesses and video documentation. The Justice Department is treating this as a test case for prosecuting discrimination in transportation facilities. The criminal charges would eventually be reduced to misdemeanors in exchange for Derek's cooperation with federal investigators studying discrimination patterns in airport operations. But the civil lawsuits were just beginning. Amelia Carter's legal team had filed a comprehensive discrimination suit seeking damages not just for the humiliation Derek had caused, but for the broader pattern of bias he'd exhibited over years. The documentation Miguel Santos had collected proved that Derek's behavior toward Amelia wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of treating passengers differently based on race. "We have 8 months of video evidence," Victoria Nash explained to Derek during a deposition that was being recorded for federal investigators. comments about those people differential treatment based on appearance demanding extra verification from passengers of color. This wasn't a mistake, Mr. Sullivan. This was a pattern. Derek's union had dropped him immediately, unwilling to defend behavior that violated every principle of fair employment they'd fought to establish. His pension was forfeit due to termination for cause. His health insurance was canceled. His reputation in the aviation industry was destroyed beyond repair. But the financial consequences, devastating as they were, paled beside the personal reckoning Derek was forced to confront. Court-mandated counseling with Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist specializing in bias and discrimination, was forcing him to examine beliefs he'd never questioned. Dr. Williams said during their 4th session, "Tell me what you were thinking when you saw Miss Carter walk into your lounge." "I thought she didn't belong there." Derek admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Based on what Derek was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. Based on how she looked, her clothes, her age, the way she carried herself. "And why did those things matter to you?" Another long silence. Because I thought the lounge was supposed to be exclusive, special. And she didn't look special. Dr. Williams made notes on her tablet. What does special look like? Derek. The question forced Derek to confront the ugly truth he'd been avoiding. Special looked like expensive suits and designer luggage and the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. Special looked white and wealthy and comfortable in spaces where others might feel unwelcome. "I was protecting something," Derek said finally. "But I don't know what I was protecting it from." "You were protecting your own sense of belonging," Dr. Williams replied gently. "You'd worked so hard to earn your place in that lounge that you couldn't bear the thought of it becoming accessible to people who hadn't struggled the way you had. The insight was devastating because it was true. Derek's discrimination hadn't been about malice. It had been about fear. Fear that if everyone belonged, then his belonging didn't make him special. 6 months after his termination, Derek was working at a customer service training company, helping to develop programs based on his own failures. It was humbling work, poorly paid, but it gave him a chance to turn his worst mistake into something educational. "This is Derek Sullivan," he would tell groups of airport employees during bias training sessions. 18 months ago, I discriminated against a black passenger so openly and completely that it became national news. I destroyed my career, faced federal charges, and became a symbol of everything wrong with customer service. The presentations were painful but necessary. Derek had become a cautionary tale, but he'd chosen to be a teaching tool rather than hiding from his mistakes. I told myself I was maintaining standards, he would continue. But the truth is, I was maintaining prejudice. I let my own insecurities and assumptions destroy my professional life and cause real harm to another human being. The audiences were often hostile. Airport workers who'd seen the viral videos, read the news coverage, watched Derek become a symbol of discrimination in their industry. But Derek accepted the hostility as part of his accountability. "I can't undo what I did to Ms. Carter," he would conclude each presentation. "But I can help you understand how easy it is to let bias destroy everything you've worked for. Because if it could happen to someone like me, someone who thought he was just doing his job, it can happen to anyone." Dr. Williams had been working with Derek for over a year, and she could see genuine change in his understanding of his behavior. "Derek's case is unusual because he's willing to confront his mistakes publicly," she explained to researchers studying discrimination rehabilitation. "Most people in his situation retreat into denial or blame others. Derek has chosen accountability. The transformation wasn't complete." Derek still struggled with the financial consequences of his actions, the social isolation that came with being a public symbol of racism, the reality that his professional reputation would never recover. But he'd found something unexpected in the wreckage of his career purpose. His story was being used to train thousands of customer service employees across the country. His willingness to admit his failures was helping others recognize their own biases before they acted on them. "I'll never get my old life back," Derek reflected during a session with Dr. Williams. "But maybe I can help prevent other people from making the same mistakes. Maybe that's worth something." It wasn't redemption. Derek understood that redemption wasn't something he could earn back. But it was growth, and for someone who'd lost everything, growth felt like a kind of hope. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Amelia Carter stood in the same spot where Derek Sullivan had told her she didn't belong. The Platinum Sky Lounge had been completely renovated, but more than the physical space had transformed. The energy itself felt different, welcoming instead of exclusive, warm instead of cold. Sophia Martinez approached with a tablet displaying the quarterly dignity protocol metrics. Customer satisfaction scores had maintained their post-incident highs. Discrimination complaints remained at 0, and employee retention was the highest in Terminal 4's history. Ms. Carter Sophia said her confidence now unshakable after 6 months of successful leadership. The Federal Oversight Committee wants to extend their pilot program. They're calling Terminal 4 the national model for dignity in customer service. Amelia nodded, but her attention was focused on the scene around them. A Hispanic family was being warmly welcomed by Elena Rodriguez. An elderly Korean couple was receiving patient assistance from a staff member who spoke their language. A young black woman about Amelia's age was seated comfortably in the exact chair where Derek had insisted Amelia didn't belong. "Sophia." Amelia said quietly, "What matters isn't the metrics or the awards. It's that young woman over there who will never know that 6 months ago someone might have questioned her right to exist in this space." Elena Rodriguez had become something she'd never imagined possible, a nationally recognized expert on workplace dignity and employee empowerment. She was traveling to airports across the country, helping implement versions of the Carter Dignity Protocols, speaking at conferences about finding the courage to do what's right. The transformation here wasn't about policy changes, she was telling a group of airline executives during a video conference from the lounge. It was about creating a culture where doing the right thing is supported instead of punished. Miguel Santos had been promoted to Terminal Operations Coordinator, overseeing the implementation of dignity protocols across all of Terminal 4's customer service operations. The union documentation he'd maintained for 8 months had become the foundation for a new model of worker protection and empowerment. Change happened here because people were willing to speak up. He explained to a documentary crew filming a follow-up story, but more importantly, it happened because leadership listened and acted. Dr. Sarah Kim had published a research paper about the psychological impact of public discrimination that was being used in medical schools and civil rights law courses. Her documentation of the incident had provided crucial evidence for federal policy changes in transportation facilities. The JFK incident proved that discrimination isn't just about individual prejudice, she was explaining to her medical students during a lecture on social determinants of health. It's about institutional systems that either enable or prevent bias from causing harm. Rachel Thompson's YouTube channel had grown to over 500,000 subscribers, largely based on her documentation of the incident and its aftermath. But she'd evolved beyond viral content to become an advocate for transparency in customer service industries. Real change requires sustained attention, she was telling her audience during a 6-month follow-up video filmed in the transformed lounge. It's not enough to fire one discriminatory employee. You have to rebuild the entire system that allowed discrimination to flourish. James Morrison had left investment banking to start a consulting company focused on helping corporations prevent discrimination incidents before they became viral disasters. His LinkedIn post about the Terminal 4 incident had launched a new career in corporate risk management. The business case for dignity is overwhelming, he was explaining to potential clients. Discrimination is expensive. In legal fees, reputation damage, employee turnover, and lost customers. Prevention is always cheaper than crisis management. But the most significant change was something that couldn't be measured or documented: the shift in how people treated each other throughout Terminal 4. Passengers noticed it. Employees felt it. Federal inspectors documented it. Officer Michael Torres had become the model for de-escalation training at the Port Authority Police Academy. His careful handling of the incident had prevented a discrimination case from becoming a police brutality case, and his approach was now being taught to law enforcement officers nationwide. The key insight he explained to trainees is that your job is to discover the truth, not to enforce someone else's assumptions. If I just arrested Ms. Carter because Derek demanded it, I'd be facing federal charges alongside him. Derek Sullivan's story had become a case study in multiple academic disciplines: psychology, business ethics, civil rights law, and organizational behavior. Universities were using his transformation from discriminatory manager to bias education trainer as an example of accountability and growth. But for Amelia, the real measure of success was personal and simple. She could walk into any space in Terminal 4 wearing anything she wanted and receive the same courteous service as every other passenger. More importantly, so could everyone else. Standing in the lounge where she'd once been humiliated, Amelia reflected on the unexpected journey from victim to catalyst for change. The incident had been painful, but its consequences had transformed thousands of lives in ways that extended far beyond customer service protocols. Ms. Carter Elena said, approaching with a group of airline executives who were visiting to study the dignity protocols, "They're ready for your presentation." Amelia gathered her materials, but before heading to the conference room, she took one more look around the lounge. The young black woman was working comfortably on her laptop, completely unaware that her piece had been purchased with someone else's courage 6 months earlier. That was exactly as it should be. The purpose of fighting discrimination wasn't to be remembered for the fight. It was to create a world where the fight was no longer necessary. Amelia Carter had walked into the Platinum Sky Lounge as someone who'd been told she didn't belong. She was leaving as someone who'd made sure everyone would belong forever. Some battles are worth winning not for the victory, but for the peace that follows. And this peace would last long after everyone involved had moved on to other challenges, other causes, other moments when courage was required to choose dignity over comfort. The legacy was simple: a terminal where every passenger was treated with respect, every employee was empowered to do what's right, and every person understood that belonging wasn't something you earned through appearance or wealth. It was something you deserved simply by being human. If this story moved you, remember that dignity isn't negotiable and respect isn't earned. It's owed to every person who walks through our doors, boards our planes, or asks for our help. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because change happens when enough people decide that everyone belongs. The person you underestimate today might be the one who changes everything tomorrow. But more importantly, every person deserves to be treated with dignity, not because of who they might be, but because of who they are, a human being worthy of respect. If you believe in justice and dignity for all people, hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe to this channel to see more stories of courage, accountability, and real change. And share this video with your friends and family because these conversations matter. Together, we can create a world where stories like this become impossible because discrimination itself becomes impossible. What's your take on this story? Have you ever witnessed discrimination like this? Have you ever found the courage to speak up when you saw something wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments below because your voice matters and your story could inspire someone else to do what's right. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for being part of the change this world needs. Until next time, remember that respect is a basic human right, dignity is non-negotiable, and courage can transform everything.